Greetings to everyone who are here and who watch us online. We start first event for today, presentation of the report Advocacy in the Occupation. Our guests are Oleksandr Pavlichenko, the Executive Director of Ukrainian Helsinki Group Human Rights Union, Martynovsky, lawyer, expert of the Regional Center for Human Rights, Lilia Hemedzhi, human rights defender, Crimean lawyer, and Olga Semenyuk, lawyer, and also internally displaced person from the occupied territories of the east of Ukraine. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us today to hear about the presentation. The report was prepared jointly by advocates, lawyers of several human rights defenders organizations, and this report is dedicated to the human rights defenders who are in the occupied territories, the lawyers who are under attack and pressure of the occupants, both in Crimea and in occupied territories of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. Ukrainian Helsinki Group on Human Rights, starting 2014, deals with monitoring and recording of the facts of violations of human rights in the occupied territories connected with the armed conflict and the armed aggression caused by Russian Federation. And it is really important to have this component to interfere and to protect the rights by the representatives of the profession that aims to carry out this defense in courts. And this is about lawyers. But the lawyers themselves, they are persecuted, and the material that was collected by our colleagues show this. And they address different sources. These were open sources such as mass media and messages, and also recorded information, documents about violations that were got in the course of a survey or interviews with people who directly were involved in these incidents or violations. So also, this is the work concerning communication and information requests to state bodies that provided information about some cases. And all this provided opportunity to accumulate data and to present overall picture about what is going on and the conditions concerning human rights in occupied territories. And you will see impressive figures. How the normal work of advocates was stopped in Crimea and in other non-controlled territories of Ukraine. And here the resolute part is important, what we propose to do in this situation. And we are trying to help in investigations and to provide support to those who suffer in occupied territories of Ukraine, and to improve the situation concerning lawyers who fled from the occupied territories. And these are the important tasks for the advocates groups and state bodies to form the policy to support lawyers who work with the occupied territories. And the Ukrainian Helsinki Union follows these violations, monitors them, and tries to act at the political level. We cooperate with the state government bodies, and we address and we provide we address international institutions that today record these violations, and they gather materials in order to have proper legal grounds concerning those crimes that are committed in the occupied territories, crimes that are committed against Ukrainian citizens. And here we want to say that the lawyers, they are additional source of protection, and they professionally carry out defense, and also they are source of information concerning those violations that happen in courts during court proceedings. And we know that these are really political persecutions, and how this pressure, this is the indication that occupants fight with these instruments of defense. They fight with these lawyers who provide protection. And here we have lawyers who fled occupied territories, and they have their own personal experience, and they have information about this pressure that is ongoing. And we should not stop at this stage, and we should follow how the situation will develop. And we should motivate the legal bodies and state bodies in order to provide proper attention to this segment. And we should understand that the advocates are a powerful instrument that protects human rights in occupied territories. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Olga Semenyuk. I'm a lawyer. Until 2014, I lived and worked in Lugansk Oblast. After the events that happened in summer 2014, I was forced to flee, and now I live in the controlled territories of Ukraine, and I never visited occupied territories since. And we faced such problem. The first one, lack of access to information. Lawyers who carried out research, they couldn't go and study situation on the ground. That's why we had to study information through open sources, and we studied the sites of occupation power that now act in the occupied territory. We spoke with lawyers and who live and work there, and we also communicated with those lawyers who fled and who had difficulties in the territory of Lugansk and Donetsk oblasts. And we didn't put their names due to security reasons, but we have several tens of such lawyers. And also we studied open sites, and also we filed requests to state bodies. What we found out, first of all, we revealed that the lawyers, it is dangerous to be a lawyer in those territories. We established one case, one killing of the lawyer. It was a grave crime. This person was cut, was beaten heavily and tied, and we cannot say that this was directly connected to his professional activity, but we cannot dismiss this fact. So at the moment, law enforcement bodies of Ukraine didn't carry out investigation of this fact. Moreover, we established cases of kidnapping of lawyers, and they were taken hostage and their property was seized. And in the report, we stated this information, and we hope that Ukrainian law enforcement bodies will carry out investigation and will establish these facts. Unfortunately, at the moment, on request of Prosecutor's General Office, these facts were not investigated. Moreover, I would like to state about those difficulties lawyers face, those who fled occupied territories. First of all, the lawyers fled in a hurry. There was no organized order, and the lawyers were not able to bring their documents, and the documents remained in those territory, and they contained some secret information, and also computers remained that contain information about clients, secret information about their clients. And here, the lawyers, they had problems because they didn't have housing, offices, they didn't have any acquaintances. They faced the problem that they were one by one, and they couldn't understand how to continue the activity. Until 2017, the councils of Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast didn't function in the controlled territory, and the lawyers were not able to contact this body to discuss the activity in the controlled territory. Only starting 2017, the council continued the activity in full scope. Also, I would like to say about those problems that we revealed. Those lawyers that are in the occupied territories face some problems in Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast. I would like to state that the lawyers that remained there for a year, they were under shelling, and it was difficult for lawyers. Those whom we surveyed, they said that they didn't have any means for supporting themselves, and the occupation authority, the Ministry of Justice of LPR, they proposed them to become lawyers in the occupied territory, and they put some demands to these lawyers. These lawyers should have had the certificate of Ukraine. The lawyer should have undergo a special verification and to be registered in the tax bodies. After that, they can work, and so we do not know about the number of lawyers in that territory. There are registers that are put on sites of occupation authority, and according to preliminary data, they said that there are 90 advocates, and now there's about 20 advocates in Donetsk Oblast more. This is about more than 200 advocates. This is what we know as of now. And more information you can find in our report. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your interest to this report, as every line of this report contains very big efforts put by my colleagues. My name is Lilia Hemedzhi from Crimea. I am an advocate. The situation with the pressure on lawyers and advocates in Crimea is well described by Oleksandr Pavlichenko in his book Punitive Psychiatry. He said that in Russia there are two formats of opposition. The first is camouflage of public life, which means first provision of information to outside of the Russian Federation that everything is good in Russia, and Russian Federation believes Crimea is a part of its history. The second provision of information inside of this of the state, how bad the situation is in the West and how good the situation is inside of Russia. Lawyers and advocates in Crimea and in Russia, they prevent camouflage in public life. They reveal and discuss in international sites actual situation with the human rights in Crimea. For this, they are pressed and persecuted in courts. On October 29th, me and my colleague Thomas Medlyaev and activists of Crimean Solidarity were issued warnings about not allowed extremist activities. We sent requests asking what is our wrongful behavior specifically, and we asked for provision of materials supporting this warning. But after that, Emil Kurbedinov, who received this warning later, he was subject to the second administrative arrest, and for the second time he was sent to the special detention center for administrative perpetrators. Any opposition to the actions of regime, the people are brought to legal liability for extremism or terrorism. Now we see that Servir Mustafayev, lawyer, is subject to criminal procedures. When we are here, he is in psychiatric clinic. He was sent there by forced procedure for psychiatric expert assessment. This is yet another format of pressure on advocates who are brave enough to shoot video, to provide video shooting of what is happening in Crimea in courts procedures, which contains multiple violations. There are not many people like this in Crimea, and the regime in Crimea is active in suppressing activities of these advocates, and the propaganda has been strengthened as a tool to this end. After Kurbidinov's arrest, there was many news plots and information videos saying how bad he is as a lawyer, and he was named a lawyer of devil. The regime in Crimea forms such way the attitude to him and the attitude to defense lawyers, to human rights activists, and but lawyers and advocates in Crimea still stand to their principles and continue to stand for the human rights of people who are unlawfully persecuted. I think the motto of today's advocates and defense lawyers in Crimea could be the words of one journalist who said that with sharp word and right deeds we are fighting the lack of order. My name is Martynovsky. I am a lawyer from Sebastopol, and since April 2014 I have been living in Kiev. To add to Lia's words, I'd like to say that in fact the situation is extremely complicated in the occupied territories. Soon we will have the 5th anniversary of Crimean events and South Ukrainian events of occupation. All this period, our lawyers in those territories, they are face to face on their own with their problems. As Olga has already said, the numbers of the lawyers who halted their activities in the occupied territories of Donetsk and Lugansk region in Crimea, the situation is also complicated, and out of 1,700 lawyers, so far over 980 have halted their activities in this territory. This is over 58% of lawyers. The reasons were different. First, the Russian Federation law was introduced. Also, they were forced to get Russian citizenship, and also they were to re-register and pass relevant exams. and they were obliged to get mandatorily the status of Russian lawyers, not Ukrainian. So what could be our conclusions? Unfortunately, the lawyers face their problems alone without support. This does not mean that absolutely nothing has been made, but those deeds, they were not linked to actual problems in these territories. Maybe this was because self-governors, government of bar association halted activities, and nobody knows what is happening in those territories. Maybe there are other problems and other reasons, but they are then only the position of now. As to this issue, the second, I would like to say that the challenges are absolutely novel. I mean, first, Crimea. As Crimea is absolutely unique in the world's history, and nobody has explained to the lawyers how to behave, whether they should get the status of Russian lawyers, how Bar Association will assess this, how the public will evaluate this. The same concerns Lugansk and Donetsk regions. The lawyers for 5 years do not understand what to do. Today they do not have work because they do not know what attitudes would be to them if they will provide support to those people, if they provide services to those people who remain in the occupied territories. As concerns the territories of Lugansk and Donetsk region, in fact, we should understand these people. If nobody provides defensive assistance to people living there, what will happen then? Even participation of lawyer in a case helped a person to requalify the sentence from intentional murder to unintentional. This means the whole years of serving sentence. The verdict of non-guilty could hardly be issued if you have no lawyer. As concerns self-governance bodies of bar, those bodies that used to be available in Crimea, they are unavailable now, and lawyers from Crimea do not take part in bar associations activities and in disciplinary commissions activities. So far, several assemblies were held, and lawyers from Crimea did not take part in any assembly so far. There is no opportunity to hold conferences on the occupied territories or address only the Bar Association, Bar Council of Ukraine can take a decision to hold the meetings in the mainland Ukraine. Our recommendations are they are based on facts, not everything is included in this report. There are many materials and correspondence which remain outside the boundaries of this report, but the authors have these materials. First, what should be done? The bodies, the law enforcement bodies of Ukraine should investigate the facts of personation of lawyers, killings, kidnappings in the territory of Crimea and occupied areas of Lugansk and Donetsk region. So far, there are no efficient investigations. We have not got information about this. Only fact was included into the state register, the second recommendation. We suppose that the following actions should be done mandatorily: to restore bar self-governance bodies in the city of Sebastopol and the Republic of Crimea. All opportunities are available for this. There are no obstacles in the law on lawyers' activity. It is essential to address the issues, to improve qualifications, to improve educational background of lawyers in Crimea. The issue related to payment of a mandatory fee has not been resolved. I think that the lawyers who are in the occupied territories, they should be free of this fee. In order to avoid discrimination, relevant legal expert assessment of acts issued by National Bar Association should be in place as concerns the regime in the occupied territories. Of course, we call on them to stop persecutions of lawyers, to stop making obstacles to the activities, and let them continue the activities based on the law. I'd like to emphasize that for the lawyers in the occupied territories, the attitude of National Association of Lawyers of Ukraine is important. Of course, sometimes lawyers should be liability, including criminal liability for the acts in occupied territories. For example, Olga Semenyuk, she was a deputy to Aksionov, and now she is in the Russian Federation Council and Committee on National Defense of Russian Federation. Of course, these people should be brought to liability for their deeds, and Olga Semenyuk so far still has a status of Ukrainian lawyer. The same concerns so-called deputy justice ministers of Donetsk and Lugansk region, occupied territories, Rabdomska and Novitska. As concerns lawyers who defend ordinary people, we should say that the law should say that they shall not be punished, and these lawyers, they should be called upon to defend the citizens in those territories. Colleagues, questions, please? Thank you, dear colleagues. The National Association of Lawyers, head of committee of guarantees of lawyers' activities, thank you for this event. It is very important. I would like to know that the accusations to the National Association of Lawyers are lacking grounds, we shall address international human rights organizations to protect the lawyers in the occupied territories. The status of lawyers in Ukraine is zero. No protections, no guarantees of lawyers' activities work in Ukraine. In Pechersk court last week, Oksana Litvin and Marina Orden, they were beaten in court, and lawyer Grabovsky was killed last year, and there still has been no verdict. There was an attack on the National Association of Lawyers in 2017, the General Prosecutor's Office received 798 appeals from the lawyers on the violations of their professional rights in the process of their professional activities, and 0 verdicts were issued. Only 2 persons out of 798 were served charges. This is the statistics in Ukraine. As concerns Crimea, I was a lawyer in Crimea myself, and I continue to support lawyers from Crimea when they address the National Association and Committee of Protection and Guarantees of Lawyers. I'd like to say that they are not obliged to pass exams. They just go and get an attestation of their qualifications in Russian Federation. In Crimea, which is Ukrainian territory, the self-governance bodies are acting, and there is a Council of Lawyers of Ukraine, and it is active, but they do not provide qualifications improvement services, because most of lawyers now work not only in Crimea but also in Kiev. You can register your address with the register and get services on qualifications improvement. Also, the lawyers from Crimea may have the second workplace registered and get all orders, documents, protection, and improve qualifications at the place of residence. Why it is so? Because in Ukraine, in Crimea, which is Ukraine, we cannot have parallel organization, otherwise we will recognize the occupation lawful, but it is unlawful, and the National Association of Lawyers does not recognize it as lawful, and we cannot leave our land to Russia. That is why there is a Council of Lawyers in Sebastopol, and it is active in order to prove that Crimea is Ukraine. The second, if you want to protect citizens, provide them legal support, advice. I have my office in Crimea too. By communication, transportation is bad. There are no problems to go there and provide services to Ukrainian citizens to prove that Ukrainian lawyers continue their activities in Crimea and concern Donbass and Lugansk region occupied territories. I'd like to note that The situation as in Ukraine is unique. We cannot even address our law enforcement bodies, although we have memorandums with them. And we address the United Nations with the request that law enforcement bodies do not protect lawyers in Ukraine. And we also protect Crimean lawyers in this situation. So this is not true that the National Association do not support lawyers in the occupied territories. We do not support the occupation, but not the lawyers. So the lawyers, if they comply with the Ukrainian legislation, we not only support them, but we try to protect their rights as much as we can. So the National Association of Lawyers is always open to cooperation and reject any political slogans. I would like to give the floor to Kolesnikov.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in this event. What I want to say, yes, the situation that happened in Ukraine is relatively difficult. And it's not easy to speak about actions of many state bodies that are obliged to deal with these issues. And we all understand that, starting from the chairman of the Supreme Council and to the Regional Department of Police. And the lawyers, they are not aside from these problems, and these problems, they they suffer from these problems even more than common citizens, because lawyers, they always oppose power, and those issues you provided. So this is in the competence of state bodies of power. And about the association and the local governance, so everything that is in the power is done, but the state does not provide some functions, and this influences the possibility to complete some tasks of other bodies. That's why we cannot say that National Association should be presented as extremely powerful body that can use a magic wand and to resolve any problem. And you understand this? And any organization carry out some work to protect interests of the lawyers, and we are speaking now about advocates and about advocates' problems. I'm also an advocate from Lugansk Oblast. Now this territory is not under control, so I know about the difficulties, and my colleagues and me, we all face the difficulties. I know about the problems, and it is difficult to speak about it in 3 or 5 minutes. And the only thing I want to say is that if we had this report before, we would provide more information about those issues that were raised here. But we should state one thing, that any lawyer, no matter what territory he is in, despite this territory, he can get information and help from the unions and associations, and the same about the register. So the lawyer may address proper bodies and to check the register and to get any necessary information. So there are such opportunities. But there is also a question about any person, not only lawyers, whether these people are interested in reaching some goals, in doing something. So terrible situation happened, and it is difficult to come to some clear conclusions. So the National Association, it didn't provide any decision or opinion that lawyers should be divided on those who are into those who are in controlled or non-controlled territory. They are all our Ukrainian lawyers. Unfortunately, not all lawyers share this opinion, and some of them, they call on to create some blacklists of lawyers who are registered and live in non-controlled territories. So then let's take and put all of them on those blacklists. So some proposals were made about this, such opinions were expressed. So we should be cautious about these issues. So when we say that someone didn't do something for someone else, we should first find out what really happened. We should work in this direction. And these questions concerning military conflicts, they cannot be resolved by several people who lived in the territory where the conflict happened. We all understand that this is the issue of the world level. Unfortunately, this is so. If you have questions, we are ready for dialogue and speak about this issue. Thank you for your opinion, the opinion of the association. So this report does not contain any political slogans if we are speaking about the structure and content. Here in the first section, international instruments are presented concerning advocates and protection of lawyers' rights, this is the opinion of ECHR and other institutions. Then cases about Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast, parts that are not controlled by the state, non-controlled territories. And this is the third one. And the second is about violations of lawyers' rights and about the work of law enforcement organizations and how the rights of lawyers are protected in those territories and what was the result of this work, with the annexes presented at the end of the book to show how we can prove this condition and the provision of information to understand these legal facts and to and these are real legal facts. We do not condemn anyone. We do not want to say something bad about someone, and we do not speak about these blacklists. We raise an important topic, that those who are in the occupied territories and work there, as Roman Yuryevich said, they are in an uncertain situation and in a vague status, because some of them work in the bodies that can be considered the bodies that de facto those bodies that are persecuted, and there is no proper response, that these lawyers remain the lawyers of Ukraine. And those who carry out their professional activity in those territories, they are practically the instruments of provision of rights. Maybe not powerful, but maybe the only mechanism. So you know about Ukrainian sailors who were seized, and the lawyers were mobilized for this work, and these were not lawyers provided by Russian Federation. And here there is a question. So whether these are professionals who protect the interests of Ukraine to defend territorial integrity and unification of the territories that will be in Ukraine de facto, not only de jure. De facto, I mean, not de jure. I'm speaking about de facto. We shouldn't argue. So I believe that here there is a proposal, there is a motive to work to improve the situation with lawyers who are in non-controlled territories in order to improve the situation, in order to improve communication with them, and also to improve quality of their work in non-controlled territories, as I've said, about those problems that were stated here separately, to provide better protection for them. About your remark about the lack of protection of lawyers, Ukrainian Helsinki Rights Union this year carries out project to protect activists, and we include in this list, and we spoke with the representatives of the National Association of Lawyers and lawyers who protect activists, and they also are under threat of attack or persecutions, and lawyers are not well protected, but the advocate has higher level of protection in comparison with common citizen, but in practice this may not be the case. So this protection should be demonstrated in the controlled territories. And also, it should be provided to the maximum for those lawyers who work in non-controlled territories. I also want to respond to your remarks from the National Association participants. First of all, I have an impression that there is no clear understanding that lawyers who are in these territories, who remain there, that they are vulnerable. You said about the situation in mainland Ukraine, about the problems. Yes, but these advocates we are speaking about, they are more vulnerable. They are in occupied territories. This is first. Next, the lawyer may be registered anywhere and to join self-government bodies, but I cannot bridge my connection to Union of Sevastopol, but I want to work there in the Sebastopol, and I do not see the problem for functioning of these bodies, and I do not see problems if they work in the controlled territory. About emotions, I would like to say that here we do not have emotions in this report. All emotions, they are in our interviews, they are in letters without answers, and they are in the materials based on which we prepared this report. And you said that you established contact with lawyers in occupied territory, but it happened in 4.5 years of occupation. It happened in 4.5 years of occupation. And as I understand, this is the only attempt to establish this contact with Crimean lawyers who remained in this territory. I'm really glad that first function is performed by this report. First function, the first task, in my opinion, was to finally have a serious discussion about what is going on with lawyers who remained in the occupied territory in Ukraine or who were forced to flee. And also, you say that the lawyer can get the status of the foreign lawyer who carry out his activity in the territory of the Russian Federation. First, if you do so, you should then recognize that Crimea is the territory of the Russian Federation. Second, the Crimean lawyers, according to the law, if they are registered in Crimea, they are recognized as the citizens of Russian Federation. So I didn't interfere when you delivered your remark. So according to Law 6 of the Code, they are treated as the citizens of Russian Federation, so they cannot get the status you said about. And the last thing I wanted to say, we should focus on things that unite us, not on things that divides us. So a lot of things can unite us. First, for example, our conclusions about the necessity to work on proper standards to protect the rights of the lawyers, those who work in the occupied territories, and those and it should be included in the convention that is now liberated, the Convention on Advocates. And I believe that National Association would agree with us that it should be done. And lastly, I would like to say that I hope that this discussion will continue, and I really hope that it will continue in the nearest future. Thank you. Dear colleagues, one word, one remark I would like to make. Don't make political slogans. There is special provision for to address our association, and you should provide evidence you referred to. And in 2 pages you wrote, on 2 pages you wrote some evidence that are not confirmed. And we are really concerned about the fate of the lawyers who work in occupied territories, and we do not have responsibility if we cannot make declarations at international platforms if we do not have proper documents, proper grounds. So those lawyers, they addressed us officially. They provided evidence about all the grounds, and the National Association is on the side of the lawyers. Also, about the wish to, also I want to make a remark. Crimea is de facto Ukrainian, and de jure is also Ukrainian, because this is illegal seizure. So de jure, it is Ukrainian. And why should I stay there? I work in Kiev, and when I protect people in Crimea, so we shouldn't divide the advocacy. You may go to the committee of protection of advocates anytime. We are always open for cooperation. I would like to express gratitude to CHR. They provide support to us on any our request, and this is organization that provides protocols for human rights defenders in Crimea. And now they contacted us during this month. I confirmed this, and I'm really glad that you contacted us and that you are ready to provide assistance to us. And I hope that this report should unite all human rights defenders organizations in Ukraine and national organization of lawyers concerning protection of rights of human rights defenders and lawyers. Thank you. I'm sorry, 1 minute. So about the order of address to the National Bar Association. How Vladimir Prokopenko can address you? He was killed in the occupied territory of the LPR. And how could Milker Bedinov, the lawyer, address you? And for 5 days, he was subjected to administrative arrest, or the association maybe does not know about such facts. And lastly, I would like to say that if self-governance bodies of lawyers in Sebastopol and in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, if those bodies worked, we should have had no reason to gather here, because these issues could have been resolved by them, and you would have more information about what is going on there if those bodies were active. Unfortunately, in several minutes we will have the next briefing. So maybe if you have questions, please, one more question. If there are no questions, Alexander, do you want to make a final remark? Maybe Emil Kurbedinov addressed and his representatives addressed, and if a lawyer is killed, I personally represent this side of Grabowski. So there are always legal mechanisms for protection. I thank our guests, and we should not argue, we should cooperate in order to overcome these problems. And here we shouldn't have conflicts among us. We maybe are not friends, but we should overcome these problems together. We should discuss these problems on different platforms. Thank you for this dialogue, and I believe that we should work together, and we should work to overcome these problems. And we see that you started work in Crimea, and we work there starting 2014. And as Lilia said, we provide the system of support in different senses. It is not easy to implement, but here joint effort is needed. And this effort should be made by the National Bar Association, and we should work for joint results. And once again, I would like to say that we do not have political slogans here, and we should speak in the right terms. And we thank all the participants. So this is the end of press conference. Dear colleagues, please, you may speak with our guests off records. Thank you for understanding.